Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "About that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Yes, today does mark the first Sunday of a new church year and the first Sunday in Advent. Today we begin a time of waiting. Waiting is something that all of us experience, and in many ways one could say our whole life is spent waiting. We wait for all kinds of things. A recorded voice puts us on hold as we wait on the phone while our ears are pumped with thin, often irritating music. I find that irritating. Our order hasn't come yet, and we're hungry. Certain circumstances cause us to ask questions like, will the rain or snow ever stop? When will that paint finally dry? Will anyone ever understand? Will I ever change? Our kids ask, how long is it until we get there? Or how many days until Christmas? Life is simply a series of hopes, waiting, and only partial fulfillments. Quite honestly, the human condition does seem to be a state of living with constantly unsatisfied desire as we wait for something that is truly fulfilling. Advent invites us to understand with a new patience that condition, that very difficult state of being. Advent means coming. And so we wait for God's coming. We wait as we prepare for God's greatest event, God's coming in all fullness. And as we begin this time of waiting, the first words given to us are from the prophet Isaiah. By the way, my favorite prophet. Isaiah's world was a chaotic, unjust, broken, hurting, warring world. Israel was a storm-tossed nation that was threatened by the powerful Assyrians to the north and east and menaced by the Egyptians to the south and west. The king and his advisors were occupied with what they needed to do to protect themselves. Events were out of control and fear was running rampant. The people were waiting for God to reveal a word concerning their situation. And into that turmoil and storm-tossed world, a voice stood out, the voice of Isaiah. Through the prophet Isaiah, God does speak, and God did speak to the people. The prophet Isaiah speaks of seeing a reality that is deeper than the reality the people were living. He proclaims God's vision for the world, holding up a vision of God's future, the one to whom the future belongs. He proclaims, "Look, focus your eyes on the mountain of the house of the Lord, for it shall rise up and be established as the highest of mountains. And people of all races will come and say, 'Come, let us climb God's mountain, go to the house of the God of Jacob. He'll show us the way he works so we can live the way we were made to live.'" God's message comes from Jerusalem. God will settle things fairly between nations. God will make things right between many people so that they will turn their swords into shovels, their spears into hoes. No more will nation fight nations. They won't play war anymore. Come, let's live in the light of the Lord, the light of God. Into that chaotic, warring world, Isaiah speaks a word of hope and a word of peace. And centered on God's dream for the world, Isaiah's vision involves more than a geographical location. It is a place of light and truth, of justice and judgment, where God's supreme power and authority are honored and enacted. It is a vision place, a place of no more war. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann has compared these words from Isaiah to the "I have a dream" speech from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Like Dr. King, Isaiah provided words of hope and peace as the people waited for that future God promised, a future that was very different from what was visible to them at the present moment. We are living in a chaotic, unjust, broken, hurting, warring world. World leaders and their advisors are occupied with what they need to do to protect themselves. Events sometimes seem out of control, and fear is running rampant in many places within our culture. And into this turmoil and storm-tossed world, a voice stands out, the voice of Isaiah. On this first Sunday in Advent, as we begin a new church year and this time of waiting, Isaiah speaks and promises us a time when God's ways will fully shape how all of us live. Every single person, all nations, all people will be streaming toward the bright light of peace, and there is enough for all. It may not look like that right now, but Advent is about taking the long view of things and seeing where the arc of justice bends as we look to the future. And as we wait for that time of God's fulfillment, God invites us not just to imagine and dream, but to make God's dream a priority in our everyday lives, living into that dream. As people of faith, we live holding up a vision of God's future for this world. We have been instructed in the Lord's ways, and now is the time to walk in them and take the word of the Lord forth into the world, caring for the poor, working for peace, unity, and enduring justice for all people, especially those most in need of restitution and hope. That is the work of the church. That is the work you are called to live. Many of you probably remember the story of Ruby Bridges, the little 6-year-old who was one of the first African-American children to integrate the New Orleans public schools. If you remember her story, every morning the federal marshals would escort Ruby through the lines of angry parents, hurling insults, racial slurs, and violent words. And then the same thing happened every afternoon when school got out. This went on for weeks and then months, until finally virtually every white family had withdrawn their children from the school. So Ruby went to school all by herself for a better part of a semester. The situation caught the attention of Harvard psychologist Robert Coles. Coles decided to go to New Orleans, where he interviewed and spent time with Ruby and her parents. He interviewed her teacher, asked how she thought Ruby, this little girl, could tolerate such continual adversity and abuse. Just listen to the verbatim that teacher gave to Coles. She said, "I was standing in the classroom looking out the window. I saw Ruby coming down the street with the federal marshals on both sides of her. The crowd was there shouting as usual. A woman spat on Ruby, but missed. Ruby smiled at her. A man shook his fist at her. Ruby smiled. And then she walked up the steps and she stopped and turned around and smiled one more time. You know what she told one of those marshals? She told him she prays for those people, the ones in that mob. She prays for them every night before going to bed and going to sleep." That interview prompted Coles to speak directly to Ruby about her prayers. "Yes," Ruby said, "I do pray for them." Coles asked, "Why? Why would you pray for people who are so mean to you and say such bad things about you?" Ruby answered, "Because Mama said I should." Coles pressed on with the questions. Ruby said, "I go to church. I go to church every Sunday, and we're told to pray for people, even bad people. Mama says it's true. My minister says the same thing. We don't have to worry," he says. He came to our house and he said, "God is watching over us." He say, "If I forgive the people and smile at them and pray for them, God will keep a good eye on everything and he'll protect us." Coles asked if she thought the minister was on the right track. "Oh, yes," Ruby said. And then, in a way of explanation, "I'm sure God knows what is happening. God's got a lot to worry about, but there's bad trouble here. God can't help but notice. He may not do anything right now, but there will come a day, like they say in church, there will come a day. You can count on it." That's what they say in church. Yes, there will come a day. You can count on it. That's what the church says. Ruby Bridges lived that as a child. And if Isaiah and Dr. King and Ruby Bridges could dream of peace and lift up that vision for us, we too can dream the dream of peace and rearrange our individual lives and the life of our communities, large and small, to be peacemaking communities of generosity, justice, and joy. We can work to develop communities where people listen to each other, communities of self-examination, of acceptance, of welcome and hospitality, of change, even though that change is not easy or fast. Now, I know we cannot do this on our own, but God does make it possible, and God's grace enables us to accomplish so much more than we can even imagine. Think of that $1,000 raised last Sunday for Tanzania. Advent is about dreams and visions, the dream of God for this world, and how God's dream comes true in flesh and blood in a child born to us, Jesus, and in and through the church, Christ's body present to this broken, warring world. As we continue to wait for God's coming in fullness, the promise of Advent is that what is coming is an unimaginable vision, an unimaginable invasion, an invasion of holiness, an invasion of God in this world. So stay awake, be alert, be ready. God is on the way. That is what Advent is all about. And as we wait, we do so by living God's dream for this world in this very present moment. Come. It is time to live in the light of God. Amen.